Welcome back to the Self-Esteem and Confidence Mindset podcast with me, Johnny Pardo. Today, we're going to be covering self-confidence, health, mindset, and much, much more. So today, I've got a special guest I want to welcome to the show, Brian Keane, who I'll quickly introduce, and then we'll dive into the conversation, who's going to be sharing a lot of experience and value in this space. So Brian is a mindset coach. He's a biohacking expert, health entrepreneur, fitness coach, personal trainer, nutritionist, best-selling author, and host of the Brian Keane podcast. So, Brian, lots and lots of hats on there, which is awesome, and lots of experience. So, welcome to the show today.
Johnny, I am really looking forward to chatting. And yeah, it's when I hear somebody else like rhyme off things, I'm always like, oh, wow, that's it. It's always crazy to hear, but no, really looking forward to chatting. Again, love what you're doing. I know you're super consistent with putting out valuable messages to people. So looking forward to unpacking the mindset side of things.
Yeah, and it's great to have someone with that range, like we were saying just before the show, of both the health and the mindset. And I love how they do slide together. So really looking forward to this conversation today. So first thing, I want to just do a little bit of an introduction for anyone who's new to your work, really, is what got you into this whole space? And so you're obviously a very passionate man, I can tell by all these things you're doing, but what got you into this whole fitness and health space and trying to help people with this?
It's such a funny one because I don't have a very traditional story when it comes to personal training, fitness, and kind of falling into the mindset space now, which is the area of fitness that I tend to specialize in. I used to be a primary school teacher, so I lived in London for 4 years and I worked as a primary school teacher. And for 2 of those years, I was personal training at nighttime. So I would go to the work in the school during the day, and then I would go to a gym. I would go home for a couple of hours, get some food, and then I would go to the gym and I would take clients in the evening for 2 of those years. And what happened with my transition into kind of fitness was when I was getting paid for personal training in a gym in London, I could never fully believe I was getting paid to do that and that this was a job that people got paid for. I was like, I would do this for free. I was like, I absolutely love this. And over the space of 2 years, I got to the point where I started making the same amount of money as a personal trainer as I was teaching, and said, you know what, I need to give this a go full time and see where this goes. So I moved back to Ireland, back to the west of Ireland in 2014, and started taking people for one-to-one personal training in a local gym there. And then over the space of 6 months, I was able to kind of grow that. I said I gave myself that 6-month runway time that if it didn't work, I'll go back teaching. I can fall back on that. I have my teaching degree. I have years of experience. I can kind of walk into a job with that. But it took off in a very positive way. And I kind of inadvertently fell into the mindset side of things, because when I was working with clients, and I've been over 10 years working with people now, so many of the people I worked with in the health space, either for building muscle or losing weight or losing body fat, most of them knew what to do, in the sense that, you know what, move more and eat cleaner. And they knew that, but they still couldn't stick to it. And I wrote my first book, The Fitness Mindset, in 2017, which did better than I ever dreamed of, Johnny. That book spent 16 weeks on the Amazon bestseller list. It went #1 in the bookstores that it hit in Ireland. And it sold nearly 100,000 copies up to this point. And it was one of those books that I wrote to help the clients I was working with. So the whole first half of it, and it's a short read, but the whole first half is the fitness side. It's called The Fitness Mindset. So training, nutrition, hydration, stress, sleep, all of these things. And then the second half is all about the mindset, you know, and dealing with anxiety, dealing with worry, how to stop overthinking, how to manage your stress levels emotionally, how to, you know, set the correct goals for yourself, and how to not self-sabotage and get back on track if you do. So the entire mindset side. And I kind of preached the book as it showed you how to get in shape, but also showed you how to stay in shape, which was effectively what my clients at the time were struggling with. And when you go down that rabbit hole of mindset, which, you know, for confidence and self-esteem, it's can be a bit of a Pandora's box. And it's so fascinating because on the surface, fitness is straightforward. Be consistent, go to the gym regularly, eat clean. Same as business is quite straightforward. Serve people, be consistent with your message, and help people in a meaningful way. Relationships are the same. Be present with your loved ones. Own your bad stuff. Make sure you're not bringing past relationships into current experiences and current how you're showing up with your partner. And the same, I'm a father now, my daughter's 7. Same thing in terms of parenting. There's a lot of stuff that we know on surface level how to do, but the mindset element and the behavior and the psychology is what sets us back, our kind of own biggest enemy living between our two ears. So I wrote my second book, Rewire Your Mindset, that focused on that. It was basically a way into my life at the time when I was struggling with balance. And I broke it into those four quadrants: health, wealth, love, and fulfillment, so that you can have kind of the best of all worlds when it comes to the confidence that you need to have to go after the things that you want, or minimizing that stress and that overthinking and that anxiety, something I've struggled with for large portions of my life. And then over the last few years, I've been using my platforms, my channels, to just promote either the fitness message or the mindset element, or a combination of both.
Oh wow, yeah, it sounds like quite a journey you've been on, from just being a primary school teacher to going through your becoming a personal trainer to then writing all these books. And what I really liked what you said is something like, for example, like we know what to do to generally how to be healthy, right? It's eat, exercise more than you consume, things like that. Eat the right stuff. We generally know what's a pretty good idea of what's good and bad. Sometimes things are hidden on the label, but generally, fruits and veg are good for you. Like what you said about business, it's pretty straightforward. I'm a big Tony Robbins fan. He's all about adding more value than anyone else. Yeah, and relationships as well. It's about showing up. I guess with money, we see, you spend less than you earn, but yet most of us don't make that mistake. I've been there in some serious money problems in
Same.
the past. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We know it at like a surface level, don't we? And then it's like, why aren't we doing it? So I really like how you're combining these approaches. So in terms of like the self-awareness and helping people understand perhaps some of these behaviors they're doing, is this something you try and incorporate into your teaching as well with people?
Yeah, I think I have a philosophy, and the subtitle to my second book, Rewire Your Mindset, is Own It, Control It, Change It. And that effectively means that taking responsibility for things and your part in it is the first step towards any change. If you want kind of control of, taking back the analogy of a car, taking the own steering wheel of your life, like you have to own it and take control of it. And I think when it comes to whatever area of your life that you're trying to improve, and that can be health, it can be fitness, it can be financial, it can be your relationships. First, you have to identify the problem. Like you need to know, well, this is the problem, and I'm in some way, shape, or form causing this problem, and I want to make it better. And you mentioned Tony Robbins there, and I'm a big fan of Tony as well. I've been to several of his events, and he's always talking about we tend to move away from pain and towards pleasure, and you need to identify what that is on the front end and set yourself that target. You can't hit a target you can't see, something else Tony says regularly. And I think once you identify, well, these are the areas of my life I want to improve, you can then put a plan in place around it. And that old philosophy, and I think it's a quote that's attributed to Buddha, but don't let your biggest enemy live between your two ears, is very applicable when it comes to your mindset, because we tend to be our own biggest enemy, and we tend to hold ourselves back either from behavioral issues, psychological conditioning from childhood, or from our environment and the people we're around, and being around people who don't lift us up or inspire us, or being caught in this negative story that we can't do things. Like one of the stories that I talk about in the book and on my podcast, on my channels, is the self-limiting dialogue, the internal self-talk that you have. And it's weird because you can really convince yourself. There's a quote I love from Richard Feynman, who is a Nobel Prize physicist, and he says, "Don't fool yourself, and you're the easiest person to fool." And it's funny how easily we can get caught up in our stories. And two things I always wanted to do was, I always wanted to run a marathon. It's something that I was like, I would love to do that someday, but I got, caught up in a story. And the other thing was, I always wanted to do a bodybuilding show. I grew up idolizing Arnold Schwarzenegger, but my language to both of those things were, that's something other people do. And that was my own form of self-limiting internal dialogue that held me back. And it was the same with business. When I was a teacher, when I thought about people running their own business, self-employed or small companies or whatever it is, the language I would put on that was, that's something other people do. And it's so funny how it becomes nearly an ego protective mechanism for yourself, as opposed to, no, I'm choosing not to put the plan in place to go after this thing I want, or I'm letting fear or this story that I'm not good enough, or I don't have enough self-confidence or enough self-worth, I'm letting that actually be the thing that's deciding my decisions. And, you know, Jim Carrey has a very famous line that you shouldn't live your life with fear disguised as practicality. And it's so easy to get wrapped up in that story, and it shows up in different shapes and forms. And I've experienced it from bodybuilding shows. And I did my first show in 2014. I did my first marathon in 2018. I set up my business in what was 2012 at the time, 2013. And all of those things, and confidence is a funny example, because I use in Rewire Your Mindset, I like to picture it like legs on a table. If you think of a table, Johnny, a table with one leg is very easy to knock, and that's what your confidence is like. And the way you build confidence is by repeatedly keeping promises to yourself and just setting those small goals that you end up working towards on a daily basis. And every time you keep that promise yourself, you add a small leg to that table, and you end up building that confidence over time. And then every once in a while you'll set a big goal for yourself. For me, it was, you know, writing a book. For me, it was doing a marathon, for doing a bodybuilding show. These big things for me. But as soon as I did them, and I was able to get over that fear and feel the fear and do it anyways, I would get these massive legs for that confidence table. And then over time, you end up rewriting your story, rewriting your script, and you become a new person as you start to live that, and that becomes your new normal. And I think anybody can do that. As somebody that was definitely in the self-limiting story, who struggled, I really struggled for confidence until probably my mid-20s. It was probably the biggest area of my life I struggled with in terms of personal self-esteem and self-confidence. And I tell people that you can, you know, your mess becomes your message. And it's something I try and share now on podcasts and books, etc., because I think anybody can go after those things that they want, but you do have to put in the work to do it.
No, thank you for sharing that. And I like what you said. I wanted to kind of go back to what you said about, you know, you changed the story a little bit, but also like those little wins as well that you can do, those little, keeping those commitments to yourself every single day, those little ones. And for you, was it a combination, just so kind of me and the audience understand, was it a combination of doing both the big goals and then the little ones? Because I know sometimes we can set these really out of range goals and we're not going to be confident until we hit them. So for you, was it a little bit of a mixture of both?
Not in the beginning. That's a great question, Johnny, because not in the beginning. In the beginning, it had to be small, seemingly inconsequential goals that I was able to do, because I didn't have the confidence to actually set a bigger goal. And the weird, and there's a massive hindsight bias here when I speak about my history, and the same when I talk to people on my podcast, or you speak to people, like we all kind of have that hindsight bias where we'll condense 10 years of work or 5 years of work into like a soundbite. And for me, the biggest one initially was having the confidence to set up my own business and give myself that 6-month runway to see if I could become a one-to-one personal trainer full time. I since left that, and I now work online only with people. But at the time, that was my goal. But it took me 2 years of working in a school as a teacher before I had the confidence in myself to actually go out and try this full time. So it sounds like it's something that nearly happens overnight, but it wasn't. It was literally 2 years in the process where I just didn't have the confidence in myself to do it. And it got to the stage when, as I said, I started to make as much money as a personal trainer than I was teaching. I was like, do you know what? It's probably time to see if I can actually make a full go with this. And then after 6 months, when I actually had a waiting list and had to bring on another trainer, it gave me a lot of self-confidence in myself. And then I decided, do you know what? I want to compete in a bodybuilding show. Now, I did that and those fitness modeling shows for business. It was something to, at the time, help promote me to more people in the local area, just because it was a differentiator for me for business to help set me apart from other people in 2014. But before I stepped on stage at my first show, and it was in the UK, it was in St. Albans in London, and I was petrified. Like backstage, I was sweating. I was afraid I was going to fall over. I was like, what will I do if people laugh at me? I'm like, my heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I was so afraid. And something happens when you get to that point of fear and you learn to feel it and you push past anyways. And this is relative. Like, this isn't, not everyone's going to do a bodybuilding show or a marathon or anything like that, but it might be an interview you're going for, or it might be asking out that person you're attracted to or that you fancy. Like, it shows up, fear shows up in different shapes and forms for lots of different people. And something weird happens when you overcome that fear. It ends up building this massive amount of internal confidence. And then because of that, over the next couple of years, I was able to set those bigger goals because I had done something, what I call it in the past, fear anchoring. I call it in books fear anchoring. You're anchoring a time in the past when you were afraid to help you deal with something that you're currently afraid of right now. And for those who haven't done this, I use the analogy of like the first time you ever kissed a guy or a girl, depending on your gender or your sexual preference. Like, I remember my first kiss, I was 11. Like, I was the most scared I've ever been before that. Like, I was like, oh my God, this is the most terrifying thing of all time. And then now, fast forward, I'm in my 30s. I have my partner and I kiss her every day. And it's something that it's just your new normal. You don't even think about it anymore. So there's times in your past, and some people have the same thing when they're driving. They were terrified in the beginning and now it's just their normal. You're looking at these times in the past when you were afraid. You're reminding yourself that you're actually able to persevere through things that you're afraid of, although this new fear feels completely new at the time, but the emotional response is similar, and you're just using that time in the past as an anchor to help you cope with it in this current moment, and then you're just rinsing and repeating that.
Yeah, I really like that, and it's like you've forgotten all the success you've had, or the times you've actually been very courageous. And and I like what you said about your show. Now that's obviously always going to be a nerve-wracking thing for the first time you do it. But like I remember even the first time, just share a bit my experience, like being in the public sector, working a day-to-day job. Even say my name in a meeting was like that terrifying. It's like, what's your name? I was like, and now I just like talk to people left, right, and centre. And then like 2 years later, I was doing updates in front of people. And I know there's people who are so scared of just very self-conscious, like I was. And you look back at those things. There's always going to be fears, coming up the more you grow. But yeah, I really like that sense of fear anchoring you're talking about there. And the driving is a good example. The first kiss is a good example as well. It's just like we've done it, that we've overcome that. So yeah, so you're kind of saying like a combination of pushing through that fear and also reminding yourself at the same time of what you've done before.
100%. And it's weird because it nearly becomes a pattern and a new pattern, and it becomes automatic over time. And something now, because you never get, this is a bit of a misconception that I think I had in the early days. I kind of thought that once you did enough things that you were afraid of, fear would go away. And now I might be wrong. Maybe in 10 years, 15 years time, it does happen. But as of now, I'm nearly 35 and I've been doing these things for the last 10 years plus. The fear doesn't go away. You just get way better at managing it. And I think if I had known that back then, it would have given me probably a faster or a shorter runway of time to getting to where I am now, because I kind of was waiting for this I've arrived moment. I'm not afraid anymore. And it's just that doesn't happen. Or if it does, it hasn't happened to me yet. It's just that you get considerably better with managing the fear.
Yeah, totally agree. So with obviously your area of, you're both, you're looking at this mindset and you're looking at this fitness, both sides to the point. Do you find like you can be, I mean, maybe from your experience or someone you've worked with, have you found someone who's perhaps a very fit individual, but perhaps they're not as emotionally healthy as they could be? Because sometimes we can be physically fit. I mean, is that something you found?
Johnny, that was me when I was competing in those shows. Yeah, like I don't even have to go to an external person. That was me. The most unhappy I was probably at the pinnacle of my bodybuilding and fitness modeling career. Now, I did very well in those world externally. I won my pro card in fitness modeling in 2014, which means you can compete for money. I finished 8th in the worlds in Las Vegas in 2015. So I did very well. I would travel around for photo shoots. I was one of those kind of magazine people. And I was driven by anxiety, like this chronic state of anxiety and panic attacks. And I put in my first book about like when I literally burst out crying in my steering wheel. It was right before my daughter was born, and I was terrified. I was literally preparing for the Worlds in Las Vegas. My daughter was born a few months before that, and I remember having these just fits of, I don't think I can handle this. I'm so overwhelmed and just in this loop of overthinking of all the bad things that could potentially go wrong. And I, from the external, was the leanest I've ever been, the biggest I've ever been, because my life was eat, go to the gym, do my cardio, sleep, rinse and repeat. because that's effectively how you live if you're in that world of bodybuilding, fitness modeling, and competitive shows. But I wasn't either. I would even argue I wasn't even that physically healthy because your body fat's too low. But I definitely wasn't emotionally healthy. I hadn't been able to take what I call in Rewire Your Mindset that 35,000 airplane view and look down at actually how I was showing up with people. And I was letting reactions and stress and anxiety drive my decisions, which made to a lot of bad decisions during that time. And it wasn't until I removed myself from that world and separated health into mental health, emotional health, and physical health, because I had them all wrapped together. That they were all one thing for me. I thought health meant you had a six pack and that you had muscles. When it's not. It's one. I don't even think that's the way it is. I think how you feel, your energy, your vitality is actually physical health. I've changed the way that I've even worded that now in recent years. But the second book, Rewire Your Mindset, came off the back of that imbalance. I couldn't figure out why I was so unhappy when I was actually externally doing quite well. I had a lot of followers on Instagram and Facebook at the time. I had a lot of money because my business was thriving, but I was working round the clock. I was lean and I was muscular, but I was so unhappy and I was just anxious all the time, like full on panic and anxiety attacks. And I had just this disconnection. I just felt so misaligned because from the external world looking in, it looked like I had everything. But I was like, why do I feel so crap? I'm like, I feel horrible. And it wasn't until I started to get clearer on what success means for me. And it was Tony that did this. I've been to several of his events and read all his books, that success is so subjective to the person. You ask 100 different people what success means, you might get 100 different answers. And I didn't have inner peace, calmness, feeling I could manage, mental resilience towards tasks. I didn't have any of that. I could set a goal and I could do a bodybuilding show and I could be a robot and I could just eat a certain way and train a certain way and switch off everything. But that only worked to a certain point. As soon as the show was over, then I would get this nearly existential dread of what now? What do I do now? The show's over. And I would get into these bouts of depression for 6 or 8 weeks until I pulled myself back out of it again. And in 2015, I decided that wasn't the way I wanted to live anymore. And then writing helped, which ended up being the first book. But there was sections of that book that just ended up being streams of consciousness onto page that helped me get to the root of some of my own issues. And then I was able to take some of it, put it back into the book. And that was the first step out of it. So yeah, I could probably use myself as an example for that question for sure.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks again for sharing that with us. So if someone is, you mentioned the word peace there. If someone is in that kind of whatever their life, we've all got different lifestyle conditions, we've all got different things going on. But for someone who is struggling to find that peace, is there anything you found that was particularly useful?
Once I separated my junk values from my real values, I was able to see what peace felt like. And in Rewire Your Mindset, I've talked about this on my podcast as well. The first step for me was admitting to myself that I had a lot of junk values, meaning that I had so much self-worth tied to the way that I looked was the honest answer. It's the embarrassing answer, but it's the honest answer. So if I was lean and I was muscular, I felt more confident in myself and I felt validated within myself. But that also meant that I could be someone external could knock me. And the example I used in Rewire Your Mindset was when I was preparing for that show in Vegas. I remember a guy walked into the gym when I was just practicing poses for the show. And he just looked at me in a passing comment and was like, geez, your legs used to be a lot bigger. And I remember getting super offended. Like I was like, as if he had just attacked my mother offended. And I was sitting there going, F that guy. Who's he? What is he? Who does he think he is? And I stared for the next half an hour, full on body dysmorphia, looking in the mirror, going, oh my God, what am I doing? My legs are smaller. I'm going to go to this show in Vegas and I'm going to be laughed off the stage. And what at the time I didn't realize, that I since realized several years later, was I didn't have a my legs are too small issue. I had a self-worth issue, and my self-worth was tied to the way that I looked. And as soon as someone challenged the way that I looked, it felt like that self-worth was just crumbling underneath me. And that was because I had a value attached to the way that I looked completely. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to look a certain way. By all means, go out there and go to the gym and build the confidence. I'm a huge fan of that. That's 50% of my message online. But also, you can't have your entire value system attached to the way that you look like I had, because that junk value means that it's very hard to find that internal peace. And once I separated that, and money was another one I had, they were kind of the two. And junk value isn't I'm not saying don't go out there and get money. I'm very fortunate with the living that I make. But I also had this: the more money I make, the more successful I am feeling. And if that money dropped month to month based on business and being a workaholic and all of that, I would feel really crap about myself. And it wasn't until I pulled those two things away and looked at, well, how am I showing up with my partner? How am I showing up with my daughter? How am I showing up with my loved ones? How am I showing up online when it comes to the content I'm creating and trying to serve and provide value to people? Once I shifted my values to that, the internal peace started to rise as a result of, one, it was in my control, meaning that how I showed up was down to me. I had responsibility for that, and I could determine that, and I could do the things like eating well and sleeping well and working out and creating good work for the world. That was all in my control, so that I could show up the best way with the people I love the most, or do the things I love the most. And once I did that, internal peace kind of was nearly a secondary thing that just rose automatically. And then once I knew that this is how this felt, I was able to double down on it.
I like that. Making sure your values are aligned to things you're in control of and that are ultimately going to set you up to win a little bit more and feel better. I remember doing that at Date with Destiny. They used to have health values like people come up with: I've got to run a marathon this time, I've got to be this body weight, I've got to look like this is their health. Whereas it's like, okay, I drank a few glasses of water today, so I'm living my value of health. I do love the work on values there. So yeah, thanks for sharing yours as well. I appreciate that.
My pleasure.
So Brian, I think we could go on talking for ages, and I'm just like really fascinated by your whole journey and everything you've shared today. But obviously, you've got a lot out there in terms of books. You've got like your social media and various messages you're trying to share with people. So before we sort of like round off, first of all, is there any kind of final point that you'd like to share? And secondly, where can people find you?
Oh, amazing. I really appreciate that, Johnny. Yeah, the where people can find me, I'll start with that. I'm on all the platforms. Brian Keane Fitness. My podcast is the Brian Keane Podcast. We're at nearly episode 400 now, so we've been going quite a while. Not quite to the 5 day a week. Well, I've got my 1 a week show, but someday we might get up to that 5 day a week like you, Johnny. But with the books, then they're online and in bookstores, on Amazon, Book Depository, The Fitness Mindset, Rewire Your Mindset, and The Keen Edge, Mastering the Mindset for Real Lasting Fat Loss. All three of my books. And the message I would say, and I open my second book with this, and this is because it connects with me as somebody that's a huge Marvel fan and a huge superhero movie fan. Nobody is coming to save you. And it's the worst thing to admit to yourself when it comes to building confidence, overthinking, dealing with anxiety, getting your values right. Nobody's coming to save you. But the beauty is you can be your own hero with that. And once you take responsibility, you can actually go and achieve whatever it is you want to do, and you can manage. If there's a problem out there that somebody else has gone through and has worked out, whether that's overthinking or anxiety or environmental depression or not being able to feel the confidence within yourself, and somebody else has gone by it, it can be done. You just need to arm yourself with the tools to do it. So that would be my call to action for people, whatever that looks like, whether it's listening to more of your podcasts or listening to other podcasts and reading books or following people on social media that inspire you and lift you up. I think that done repeatedly is something that can yield a massive benefit for people in their lives.
Yeah, putting the power back into them and taking that. There are people out there to help, but it starts with you ultimately. We're not short of help in today's world,
No.
but ultimately it starts with us seeking it and deciding we want it, and we want to help ourselves first of all. So great last message. Thank you, Brian. And thank you for being such an amazing guest today. Appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure. And Johnny, keep doing what you're doing. I know you're putting in a massive grind helping people with confidence and self-esteem. So keep up the awesome work.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. So that concludes our episode for today. And remember, work on your self-confidence every single day.